The police said it was my bodyguard. I said nothing, just nodded and stared at the blood still drying on the marble. The streaks were still pink in the places where the sunlight hadn't reached. I counted 3 partial footprints, 1 dragged, 2 clean. Someone had panicked, then remembered they were supposed to act calm. That detail sat with me longer than it should have. I had returned from Tokyo a day early. That's what they believed. In truth, I never left. The lie was a gift, one I gave carefully and wrapped in silence. The body zipped into the bag wore Daniel's Rolex, not my guards. But I didn't correct them. Not yet. You don't ask the magician how the trick is done until after the show. You wait. You observe. You let everyone believe the illusion. And when the final curtain drops, you see who's still clapping. That morning, I stood in my own foyer like a stranger. Officers moved around me, gloved hands dusting, photographing, asking questions I pretended not to hear. Their words became fog. All I could see was the watch, Daniel's watch, half tucked under the wristband of a man who should not have been in my house at all. They thought it was a break and gone wrong. A tragic accident, maybe a robbery. They asked about enemies. I said I travel often, I work in tech, people don't always like success. They nodded. They accepted that. People always accept a story that sounds just close enough to true. But here's what they didn't know, Daniel had no reason to be in my home. He hadn't stepped foot here in over a year. Not since the last time we argued about her. And she, my wife, was still upstairs pretending to be asleep when the police arrived. She knew I wasn't in Tokyo. She knew the trip was a fabrication. And yet she played the part perfectly, gasping at the news, reaching for me with trembling hands like a grieving actress too deep in character to remember the script wasn't real. I didn't flinch. I let her touch me. Let her cry on my shoulder and ask questions she already had answers to. Who would do this? She whispered. That was the wrong question. I waited for her to ask the right one. The right question wasn't who. It was why. And more importantly, how did I know? But she didn't ask. She didn't ask why the watch looked familiar. She didn't ask why my return flight didn't appear on any airline manifest. She didn't ask why the cameras, every last one, were conveniently disabled at the exact moment Daniel's heart stopped beating on our polished floor. That told me everything. She wasn't surprised. Not really. Maybe not by the blood, but maybe by the body. Because the man lying dead in my house wasn't supposed to be Daniel. It was supposed to be me. And suddenly everything became clear. The canceled trip, the missing files, the locked drawer in her study she never used. The pills I didn't remember taking, the dreams that felt too long. She had tried to write an ending. Only she got the characters mixed up. She thought I was the fool asleep while she played her little games with Daniel behind my back. But I was already watching. And now, the dead man in my house was the wrong casualty. But maybe the right message. Let them come. Let her think I don't know. Because I do. And now I wait. For her next move. For her to ask the one question that might save her. What do you want? And when she does, I'll smile. Because it won't be about what I want. It'll be about what I already took. And what she'll never get back. Not from me. Not from the grave. Not even from Daniel. A body in your house changes everything. Especially when it was meant to be yours. She ran to the morgue like a grieving widow. But the face under the sheet wasn't mine. Not even close. The man on the table was a stranger to her. He should have been. But she had to pretend. It was the role of a lifetime. I watched her from behind the two-way mirror, the chill of the observation room seeping into my bones. Glass separated us, but it might as well have been years. Because I didn't recognize her anymore. She sobbed. Beautifully, tragically, convincingly. The kind of sorrow people believe when it's loud. But it was too precise, her breath catching on all the right beats, her hands trembling with just the right amount of restraint. I'd seen her act before. At dinner parties. On red carpets. In bed. But this was something else. This wasn't performance. It was survival. When she pulled back the sheet, her body tensed. A fraction of a second too long. And then it happened, the mistake. Not grief. Not horror. Calculation. Her eyes didn't linger on the dead man's face. Instead, they darted just briefly to the corner of the room. Not the mirror, but just beside it. As if looking for a cue. A director. A camera. A way out. She thought she was alone. She was wrong. I had seen that look before. Not during fights or affairs, but during rehearsals. Back when she was nobody and I was the one who believed in her. Back when the only scripts she followed were ones I printed out. Now she was rewriting the story. Without me. And still, she didn't recognize the plot twist. The coroner asked her to confirm the identity. She hesitated. Not out of pain. Out of strategy. It wasn't Daniel under that sheet, but someone who wore just enough of his life, his watch, his shoes, the clothes he left at our house to confuse the narrative, to buy time. That's what I'd given her. Not a body. A ticking clock. And now I was watching to see what she'd do with it. She nodded. Said it was me. Her husband. Gone. The coroner looked away out of politeness, not seeing the flicker of relief that crossed her face. Not grief. Relief. A new chapter had begun in her head. One where she inherited everything. One where secrets died cleanly. One where she played the widow and Daniel the savior. But fiction has its price. And this story wasn't hers to control anymore. Because as she left the room, still sniffling into a tissue she'd never actually used, I stepped away from the mirror. Back into the shadows. She'd buried the wrong man. And I was still alive. Which meant this story was just beginning. She cried like a woman who'd lost everything. But her eyes searched the room like she still had something to hide. You can fake grief. You can fake love. But you can't fake being surprised by the wrong body. They danced in the kitchen, two killers in gym clothes, spinning where I used to make her coffee. Not tango. Not salsa. Celebration. The camera caught everything. Hidden inside the vintage wall clock she insisted we keep for character, she said. She had no idea it was the only thing in the house that ever truly saw her. And now, so had I. The footage was silent, but I could still hear them. Her laughter had changed. It used to ring like wind chimes, unexpected, spontaneous. Now it was manufactured, squeezed through her teeth like venom through a smile. He laughed too, Daniel. Daniel, who used to call me brother. Daniel, who toasted with her using protein shakes like they'd just won the lottery. They had. At least, they thought they had. I rewound the footage again and again. Not out of disbelief, but to study the rhythm of it, the rehearsals, the blocking, the sinister choreography of betrayal. He mimed a fall. She clapped like a director. They tested angles. Practiced urgency. Trip on the stairs. Hit his head on the marble. Panicked. Tried to save him. Too late. They even choreographed the phone call to emergency services down to when she'd let her voice crack. But the part that stayed with me, what I watched over and over, was the moment they paused. Right at the kitchen island. The place where I used to slice oranges for her morning tea. Daniel pulled out a folder. She opened it. Inside, a signed life insurance policy. $2 million. My signature. My death warrant. Except, I never signed that version. Not really. A forgery. Sloppy. Ambitious. The ink barely dry. They thought the real performance would happen on the marble floor. But the real theater was here. In their smirks. Their trust in each other. Their trust that I was already gone. I watched them toast to my absence. Watch her lean into his shoulder, whisper something, then laugh again, sharp, brittle. Her betrayal didn't break me. It clarified everything. The silence in our marriage. The late-night workouts. The way she started calling me babe again, as if rediscovering affection when really she was rehearsing for guilt. Watching the footage wasn't rage. It was awakening. They saw me as dead. A body to be moved. A signature to be faked. An obstacle to their version of freedom. But I was alive. And more dangerous than they could imagine. Because now I had something stronger than proof. Perspective. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a declaration of war. And I wasn't the one who needed a script anymore. They planned my death like a dress rehearsal. But I've always been better at improv. A camera never lies. But people do, especially when they think no one's watching. He wasn't strong. He only played strong until I told him I knew. Not the kind of knew you shout in anger. The kind you whisper, slowly, like uncoiling a rope he didn't realize was around his neck. Daniel died in my study. But not because I touched him. He died because I saw him. Really saw him. The man who once towered beside me in wedding photos, the uncle to our unborn child that never was. The man who looked me in the eyes and called me brother while rehearsing my exit behind my back. He wasn't built for this kind of truth. The study was quiet, books, old whiskey, the soft tick of the clock whose secrets I now carried. Daniel paced like a caged animal. He thought we were meeting to talk about the company. About stocks. About appearances. I let him think that. At first, he started confident. He always did. A leather jacket over a fitted gym tee. Relaxed shoulders. Too much cologne. But his eyes betrayed him. Scanning. Blinking too much. Like a child hiding a stolen toy behind his back, forgetting that his pockets are see-through. And so I spoke. Not accusations. Not threats. Just truth. The watch. The phone calls. The kitchen camera. The signature that wasn't mine. The protein shake toast. And finally, her smile, the one I hadn't seen in years, suddenly reanimated for him. With each word, something inside him buckled. His arms crossed, then uncrossed, then tucked behind his back. A man used to commanding rooms, suddenly unsure where to put his hands. Still, I didn't raise my voice. I let silence do the talking. Let the truth echo in the gaps between my sentences like footsteps in an empty hall. You knew, he finally said. Not a question. A realization. I nodded once. He laughed, a short, hollow bark, then rubbed the back of his neck like he could squeeze the shame out through his skin. You're not going to hurt me, he said. You're not that guy. And he was right. I wasn't. I never needed to be. Because men like Daniel don't break from fists. They break from mirrors. I stepped aside. Gave him the doorway. The chance to leave with whatever pieces of himself he could carry. He turned too fast. Didn't see the dumbbell bar, hers, not mine, left leaned against the bookshelf from her last home workout. The irony burned. The woman he conspired with left the very thing that killed him. One backward step. A slip. A sickening crunch. Then silence. He wasn't strong. He only played strong until the weight of his own lies brought him down. I knelt beside him, not out of panic, but out of something more complicated. Curiosity, maybe? Or the last flicker of grief for the man I once called friend. His eyes were still open. But what stared back wasn't Daniel. Just a man who realized too late that truth is heavier than iron. And some betrayals don't need punishment. Just exposure. Some people don't crack. They dissolve. Quietly. As soon as you stop believing in the version they sold you. He thought I'd come with fists. I came with facts. And that was enough. She thought she'd won. The deposit hit her account that morning. $2 million. Paid out not for love, not for grief, but for a performance. A reward for a role she thought she'd nailed. She wore black, of course. Simple, elegant, widowcore chic. Hair tucked neatly, lips subdued, eyes red, but not too red. The kind of grief you practice in the mirror. She arrived at the morgue with the air of someone who expected the world to step back and admire her tragedy. But the world was already watching. She just didn't know it yet. By the time she walked in, the footage was already in motion. Not viral. Not public. Precise. An anonymous package. USB drive. Timestamped. Sent to the lead detective the night before, delivered with the clean chill of a scalpel. It contained everything. The camera in the clock. The kitchen rehearsal. The protein shake toast. The forged signature. The folder with Daniel's greasy fingerprints and her careless smile. And of course, her hand on the dumbbell bar. Posture. Pressure. Placement. She never thought to wipe it. Why would she? She thought I'd be dead. I didn't include a message. Truth doesn't need commentary. All I did was wait, and she played her part. When the detective greeted her, she nodded solemnly. Her voice lowered just enough to tremble. I'm ready, she said. Ready to lie. Ready to claim a life she hadn't earned and a death she hadn't grieved. Inside, she pulled back the sheet on the John Doe she swore was her husband. Not even close. The pause was telling. The breath that didn't catch. The eyes that didn't widen. The flicker of confusion that she swallowed before anyone could name it. Still, she nodded. Yes, that's him. But the room had changed. No one told her. No one challenged her. They didn't need to. Because as she signed the confirmation papers, the detective excused himself. Calmly. Politely. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. Truth, when timed correctly, does the screaming for you. I watched the body camera footage later, just once. He entered the hallway. Slipped into the office. Opened the package. Watched the video. The still frame where she laughed wide, unguarded, was timestamped just 3 days before her husband's accidental death. When he came back into the room, she was still signing the forms. Still performing. Still believing in the fantasy of her invincibility. Thank you for your time, he said. She smiled. The kind of smile you wear when you think the worst is behind you. She didn't know the real performance had already ended. And the encore? Would be hers alone to explain. She didn't bury a husband. She buried a mistake. And now the grave was shallow. I didn't need revenge. Just timing. And the patience to let her lie while the truth bloomed beneath her feet. They read her texts out loud in court. She didn't cry. Not once. Not when they said Daniel's name. Not when they showed the footage from the kitchen. Not even when the prosecutor repeated her exact words. It'll be quick. Just one fall. He won't suffer. Her eyes didn't flicker. But her jaw clenched just barely. Her lawyer argued coercion. Trauma. Delusion. He called her a woman manipulated by a lover, trapped in a fantasy spun by a man who made her feel seen for the first time in years. The jury didn't blink, because the footage told a different story. Not of a woman seduced, but of a woman calculating. Not in lingerie. In Lululemon. A tactician in athleisure. Smart enough to forge signatures. Careful enough to know where the cameras weren't. Careless enough to miss the one that was. The dumbbell bar was shown again. Her fingerprints. Her stance. The moment she turned away before Daniel stepped back, like she knew. She flinched slightly when the prosecutor called her composed. Ironic, given that was the word she once used for me. "You're so composed," she'd said. "You never react." Now she understood what that meant. Composure isn't silence. It's precision. I sat near the back, not out of humility, but because I didn't need to be seen. Justice doesn't require an audience. She never looked at me. Not once. But I didn't need her to, because she had already seen me where it mattered. In her mirror. In her dreams. In the quiet terror she wore beneath her stillness. 25 years. No parole. The sentence was read like a funeral rite. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. She didn't gasp. Didn't beg. Didn't protest. She simply stood as they cuffed her. Straight-backed. Still in black. The widow who wasn't. As she walked past me, she kept her gaze forward. Eyes fixed on something I couldn't see, maybe a memory, maybe a regret, maybe nothing at all. The courtroom emptied slowly, murmurs thick in the air. Her lawyer packed up with shaking hands. The prosecutor nodded once in my direction, not gratitude, just acknowledgement. This was never a win. Just an ending. Outside, the air smelled like new rain. Not cleansing. Just wet. I walked home. Didn't call anyone. Didn't post. Didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't closure. It was consequence. And for the first time in years, the silence between us meant exactly what it sounded like. Nothing. Some victories don't feel like triumph. They feel like truth finally exhaling. She wasn't destroyed in court. She was unmasked. And the face underneath didn't flinch. I stood in the bathroom, shaving for no one. Just a man with a heartbeat and too many keys. Keys to a house that no longer needed locking. Keys to cars no one drove. Keys to a life that technically belonged to a dead man. The house was quiet again. No cameras. No ghosts. Just the hum of guilt vibrating beneath the drywall. I didn't kill him, but I watched him die. And that's something you don't wash off. I told myself it was justice. That he slipped. That she placed the bar, not me. That the house or house was a trap of their own design. But guilt doesn't care about details. It arrives anyway like condensation on glass. Gradual. Then everywhere. The blade scraped skin, slow and steady, and for a second I envied the simplicity of it. The neatness. One clean line and everything unwanted falls away. I tried to feel clean again. I made the bed. I folded the laundry. I brewed the coffee exactly how she used to like it, then poured it down the sink. Routine. Order. Breathing. But the mirror kept showing me someone I didn't recognize. Not older. Not colder. Just thinner. Not in body. In outline. Like the shape of a man who had once belonged in his own life but now only borrowed it. There was a photograph on the bathroom shelf. One we'd forgotten to take down. A trip to the coast. Wind in her hair. My hand on her shoulder. We looked happy. Or at least good at pretending. I stared at that photo longer than I meant to, unsure who I missed more, the woman she pretended to be or the man I used to be beside her. There was no music in the house anymore. Only that low, invisible tone, regret in a minor key. Every corner whispered. You didn't kill him. You just didn't stop him from dying. And it was true. I hadn't pushed Daniel, but I had told him the truth knowing it would gut him. I had cleared a path for gravity and guilt to do their work. I hadn't planned it, but I hadn't not planned it either. What does that make me? The kind of question the mirror won't answer. The kind of truth that won't sit still long enough to catch. Ashes settle eventually. Even the ones no one burns. But when I looked in the mirror that morning, I didn't see a survivor. Or a villain. Or even a man. Just someone shaving in silence. Trying to pretend that clean skin means clean hands. The insurance agent's name was embossed on the rejection letter. But his initials were in her journal. I thought it ended with Daniel. Thought the house had already emptied its ghosts. Thought I had scraped every lie from the walls, wiped every betrayal from the mirror. But betrayal doesn't knock. It lingers. It folds itself into receipts. It clings to forms. It waits. I was cleaning out her office, what used to be a guest room then became her creative space, though I rarely saw her create anything but excuses in it. There, between a folder marked estate planning and a hotel receipt dated months before Daniel died, was a letter. Policy rejection, revised assessment required. The agent's name, Thomas B. Kettering. Clean. Professional. Nothing suspicious at first glance. Until I found the journal. The one she thought she burned. She didn't. She'd shredded most of it, pages torn, some soaked, as if she'd changed her mind mid-destruction. But water doesn't erase ink. And neither does shame. I let the pages dry in the sun. And as the paper curled back into form, a name emerged again and again. TK. Tom. My lifeline. Not Daniel. Not me. Thomas. He didn't just approve the policy. He helped write it. The payout Daniel toasted was signed off by a man who also kissed her on her birthday and gave her red tulips in winter. She'd written that part in a different hand, almost poetic. He brings color when Daniel brings chaos. I didn't feel rage. Not anymore. The betrayal wasn't sharp, it was smothering. Like fog you walk through for too long and forget what dry skin feels like. Daniel had been the storm. Obvious. Loud. He rehearsed my death in the kitchen and danced in gym clothes. But Thomas was the fog. Silent. Systemic. The kind of betrayal that doesn't need music or mirrors or choreography. He was the one who made it legal. The one who added the policy writer she wouldn't understand but trusted anyway. The one who watched from behind desks and data. Who never left a footprint on the marble, just a signature on the line that would make my death worthwhile. He loved her too. That's what undid me. Not that she used him, but that maybe she didn't. Maybe Daniel was the decoy. The one meant to distract. The one meant to die. Because Thomas never showed up. Not at the house. Not at the funeral. Not even when her name hit the papers with the words life sentence beneath it. He vanished like smoke. Or maybe he was never meant to be seen. I stared at the letter for a long time. Held it up to the light like scripture. Then folded it quietly and placed it back between the receipts. I wasn't sure what haunted me more. That there was another man. Or that I was the last one to find out. Some betrayals don't break you. They soften the edges until you forget where you end. She had a man to kill for her. And one to write the paperwork. I just loved her. She took everything but my pulse. That was her mistake. Because a dead man can't fight back. But a living one? He can outlast. I'll wait. I'll watch. I gave them the evidence on him too, on Thomas. Quietly. No grand reveals. No dramatic phone calls. Just a manila envelope. Anonymous return address. Inside, emails, policy drafts, payments tagged as consulting but timed a little too perfectly. An itinerary that overlapped with hers. A bouquet invoice dated 3 weeks before Daniel's fall. Red tulips. In December. The system began its slow turn. Bureaucracy doesn't scream when it devours, it chews. Silently. And Thomas would feel every grind of it. But revenge didn't feel like justice. It felt like standing in an empty room, whispering into an echo. Repeating truths that no longer needed telling. The kind of hollowness that doesn't leave space for anger, just noise. They called me a victim. They were wrong. Victims want resolution. I wanted quiet. I didn't want to testify. Didn't want another courtroom, another suited stranger asking how it felt to be almost murdered by someone I once held in the ocean. Didn't want to describe the way Daniel bled or the way she smiled when she thought no one was watching. I wanted to stop dreaming in courtroom dialogue and concrete cells. Because that's what survival is sometimes. Not a triumph. Just not being there anymore. I started sleeping on the guest bed. Ours smelled like too many ghosts. I left dishes in the sink. Let plants die. Read the same 3 pages of a novel I couldn't finish just to feel like I was beginning something. The papers kept coming. Depositions. Updates. Requests for further comment. I gave none. Because I had already said everything I needed to. Not in words. But in the space I left behind. I stood in that house surrounded by proof folders, letters, photos. But what stayed with me wasn't the evidence. It was the quiet. The first time I sat with it and didn't feel afraid. Didn't flinch at a floorboard. Didn't hear her voice in the creak of the stairwell. Just silence. And the sound of my own breathing. That's what she didn't take. Not my heart or my mind. But the simplest, most defiant thing left. I was still here. You can survive betrayal. What's harder is surviving the version of yourself who still wanted her. Vengeance is loud. Peace is a whisper that stays. I deleted the footage. Burned the journals. And walked into the sea. Not to die. To feel cold again. Real. Alive. No plan. No recording device. No angle to exploit. Just skin against salt, lungs against wind, silence that didn't ask for anything in return. For the first time in months, maybe years, I let myself be still. No watching. No waiting. No reacting. The house no longer mattered. Neither did the courtrooms, the headlines, or the echo of her name in places we once loved. She had tried to turn my life into a payout. tried to assign a value to breath, memory, trust. But I walked away without her shadow. Not because I won, because I let go. Grief had carved me, but it hadn't claimed me. The fire she lit, slow, calculated, financial, was meant to consume me. But I stepped out of it. Not scorched, tempered. I left the ashes behind. Not out of spite, but out of need. The camera footage? Gone. The journals? Smoke and silence. People think justice is what frees you. It's not. It's what closes the door. But freedom? Freedom is walking away from the house you built with someone who never meant to stay. The tide was rising around my waist as I stood there, waves pushing and pulling without care. No jury, no mirror, no ghosts, just water, and the last breath of a life I no longer needed to analyze. She called me composed, cold, unmoved. She was wrong. I felt everything, and I still chose to survive. Not as the man she betrayed, not as the one Daniel tried to erase, but as someone new, forged, quiet, free. Some endings don't arrive with sirens. They arrive with stillness. She tried to write my obituary. I rewrote my name.